All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. For those of you who don't know, my name is Bob Bruner. I'm the Exotic Forest Pest Educator with Purdue University's Department of Entomology. This is our final session of the Emerald Ash Borer University's spring semester of 2024. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you those of you on YouTube who are watching this right now. Today we are going to be hosting Christy Stultz. She is a nursery inspector with the Indiana DNR. And today she's going to be talking to us about how Indiana has been managing spongy moth. So Christy, do you want to go ahead and take it from here?
All right. Thank you so very much, everybody, for joining us today. See if I can get my screen to. There we go. So that's a relatively recent photo of me up there in the corner, just so you can kind of put a face and a voice together. As Bob said, my name's Christy Stultz. I'm a nursery inspector and compliance officer with the Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology here with Indiana DNR. Graduated from Ball State with my master's degree in biology. I've worked for the division since about 2012. And always like to give a plug for my coworkers. There are only 12 of us inspectors out in the field, and we've got a pretty diverse background of folks, some entomologists and forest pest specialists and horticulturalists and botanists and just a lot of different folks. Uh, so here's my what I hope to cover today slide. Uh, Before I get too far in, I do want to make a brief statement about the name change, as some folks may know this as a under a different name. The Entomological Society of America is going through and finding names of common names that are considered derogatory or harmful to certain groups of folks, and we're finding better names for those insects. And spongy moth recently had a name change, so if I slipped during the talk, I apologize in advance. And if I have some older pictures that might have older terms on it, I apologize for those too. We're in the process of going through and getting all that stuff updated. But so today, it's going to be kind of a real just overview of what spongy moth is, where it came from, where did it start in Indiana, where are we now, and for those folks who've got it, what can you do about it? So, spongy moth is an invasive species, and that means that it's not native and it's causing harm. Our definitions when we're talking about this sort of stuff and pest management really matter. To be invasive, it has to be not native to the area you're talking about and cause harm. Those are two really important factors when we start using that invasive species term. It is a Lepidoptera, which means it's a moth butterfly order. Native to Europe, it was introduced near Boston in the late 1860s. It was introduced in an attempt to mate with silkworms to create an inexpensive silk trade. Silk moths and spongy moths cannot mate to create offspring. Spongy moth doesn't create silken webs or cocoons or anything, so it was a pretty ill-fated endeavor from the beginning. Unfortunately, during these experiments, a few caterpillars escaped, and the individual doing experiments actually told authorities, "Hey, I've had some of this caterpillar escape into the wild," and they thought, "Yeah, it's a couple caterpillars. What damage can it do?" And it has gone on to become one of North America's most devastating forest pests. Um, Through the years, there's been lots of attempts. It's a really old picture, early 20th century, of burlap banding as a form of management, and that's something we do still do today. And this picture here on the right, I don't know if you can see way out there on the ends of the tree limbs, are gentlemen who are actually attempting to remove spongy moth egg masses from a tree in an attempt to manage populations. So for over 100 years, we have gone to great lengths to manage this particular pest. Before we think about managing anything, we have to get a positive identification. We have to know exactly what it is we're dealing with so that we know something about its life cycle and biology, and we can then effectively manage it. So the spongy moth life cycle right now, we are in the caterpillar life stage. Caterpillars typically hatch late April, early May. Everything is very weather dependent. If we have a very warm spring in Indiana, then they will hatch a little earlier. If we have a very cold spring, then they'll hatch a little later. But generally speaking, towards that end of April, last week of April, we've got hatch. When they hatch, they're this really tiny, nondescript black little caterpillars that hang out on the egg mass for a while. There are actually hundreds of caterpillars in that particular picture. They are caterpillars for roughly 40 days. In that time, they go through several instars. They're growing and they're changing shape and coloration a little bit. A picture on the left is second, probably second instar, maybe third instar, and then we have the picture on the right that's got a very large and recognizable and identifiable caterpillar. They do not build tents or webs. Really important distinction with spongy moth. A lot of folks will see something like eastern tent caterpillar or fall webworm that create these large, massive webs and webs nests and think it's spongy moth, and that's not spongy moth at all. It does not do anything like that. This is the stage that's easiest to learn to identify. And it's also a great stage to do management in. But the caterpillars go through 5 instars if they're males, and they go through 6 instars or growing stages if they're females. And that's because the females have to have this extra energy. They grow a little longer, feed a little longer because they need all the extra energy to produce eggs. This is the only life stage of spongy moth that does any feeding at all. So they're pretty ferocious. They have to consume a lot of material to get a lot of energy so that they can complete their life cycle. Caterpillars will also do this thing called ballooning, where they may release a single little thread and they will hang from trees and they will let the wind catch them and they will just blow or balloon to wherever they may. If they happen to land in a place that's got a good food source, then fantastic. They've got a new place to thrive. That's how they kind of naturally spread, mostly is through that ballooning. I think on the wind they can move maybe about a half mile in a shot, but if they land in some place that doesn't have good food source, that's okay. They'll balloon again and go until they do find a good food source. Again, spongy moths is exceedingly unique and very identifiable once you get these large caterpillars. You see here on the right side of the screen, we have the head. Hopefully you can see my mouse a little bit. And here's the head. And there are these series of blue dots. There are 5 blue dots right behind the head, 5 pairs. And then we count 6 pairs, kind of hard to see here at the tail, but there are 6 pairs of red dots. And we have these nice bits of tufts of hair. So 5 blue dots, followed by 6 pairs of red dots and those tufts of hairs, and you pretty much know you've got spongy moth. And right now, of course, we're in the middle of May, so if you're in an area where the spongy moth occurs, my guess is you're probably seeing some feeding, maybe a lot of feeding, and they're starting to get to this stage because we're getting ready for the pupal stage. Towards the end of May here, 1st of June, again, depends on how much feeding they can do and whether everything is really weather dependent. Once they've hatched, though, they're in a caterpillar stage for about 40 days. Once they begin to pupate, they're in the pupation stage for 10 to 14 days, typically through the month of June, maybe a little bit into July. The pupal casings are fairly nondescript, maybe about the size of your thumb. That picture in the middle is actually a pupal casing. You can see in the end of it where the adult has emerged. And then there's a freshly laid egg mass right there next to it. The picture on the left is a number of pupal casings all up together, and they're covered in the hairs from the caterpillars. Again, takes about 10 to 14 days. So here at the end of June, by the 1st of July, we're going to start seeing adults. Males emerge first, and females emerge short time after. The females cannot fly, so they emit a pheromone to attract the males to them. Again, they don't feed as adults. They live just long enough to mate. A single female will a single egg mass. They are a little nondescript. They can look a lot like a number of native species, but they have this really unique character that on the forewing, they have this little chevron pointing to a dot. And the males have it as well, though they're a little more difficult to see. Males are typically an inch to an inch and a half long. Females roughly about 2 inches long. And the males also have this really beautiful feathery antenna. There are some native moths that have that feathery antenna as well. But together with that chevron pointing to a dot, we know we've got spongy moth. Um, Here's another picture of the female, just because I think it's a really beautiful picture of her. And you can again see on her forewing, on that top wing, that chevron pointing to the dot. You can see her antenna. She uses it for sensory, but she's not like the male. She's not out searching for pheromone. And of course, her body is just covered in hair. And that hair is what is used to cover the egg masses. So adults are in, when we see June through July, maybe into August, just long enough to mate and lay an egg mass. And then once that egg mass is laid, typically they start laying here in July, and it will go through until they're done, August, September, and then they spend the majority of their life as an egg in that egg mass. They can be laid singularly, but underneath that egg mass are all these tiny little eggs. One female, one egg mass, but each egg mass can contain 500 up to 1,000 individual eggs, and that's just an uncovered egg mass there in that second picture to show you just how many eggs are in that little tiny egg mass. And that egg mass can be different shapes, sizes, and colors. Typically, say it's about the size of your thumb. It can be laid singularly, or you may have groups of egg masses together. Again, various sizes and shapes. Coloration changes as they're weathered through the winter. But they all have that kind of spongy appearance, hence the common name. A little bit like cotton bally, spongy appearance to the egg mass. And they can be laid anywhere. Again, that female can't fly. She's actually too heavy with eggs to fly, but so she can't fly, but she can walk and move where she needs to lay her egg mass. And she can lay a single egg mass, but she's going to find somewhere protected. And it's not uncommon to see groups of females together laying egg mass wherever they can, including on picnic tables or on that camper or RV you've got sitting outside that you think you might want to take down and go camping in the summer. If you live in an area where spongy moth occurs, really important to look at all your kids' bikes, campers, RVs. Look for these spongy moth egg masses and remove them before moving that equipment out of the area. We want to make sure that we don't have any human assisted movement of this pest. And again, when in doubt, if you see an egg mass and you're not quite sure about what it is, if you can safely get a picture of it, you're here in Indiana, your Purdue Extension agent, or us here in entomology and plant pathology are happy to get photos and help people identify what might be the creator of that egg mass or what that insect is. So, caterpillars, one of the reasons why spongy moth is so devastating is because they will feed on over 500 different types of plants. They much prefer oaks. Oaks are definitely their preferred, and they really like white oak in particular. So if you've got some nice, great big white oak trees, and again, you're in that area where spongy moth is known to occur, odds are you've probably seen a little bit of feeding. You may have even seen a lot of feeding. If oaks or spruce or hawthorn aren't available, they'll feed on cherry or hickory or elm. Not the favorite, right? If you got a cherry tree next to a white oak tree, they're going to be on that white oak tree until there's nothing more to eat before they move off, but they will eat those moderately preferred species as well. And in a pinch, if nothing else is available, they'll feed on things like catalpa and tulip tree and viburnums. Food is a food source. It's not the greatest, but it's good enough to complete their life cycle. So the big problem with any defoliator is kind of that multiple year defoliation. And this is a photo from Fort Wayne where we have had some localized defoliation. We've had some localized defoliation in a number of places in Indiana. The danger of repeated defoliation is it reduces the tree's ability to produce and store food. So as subsequent years they can begin to decline, become more susceptible to disease and other insect pests. If you have a perfect specimen of an oak tree, it's really healthy, it's really vigorous. It gets defoliated by spongy moth in year one. Well, here coming in June, when the caterpillars are done feeding and your pupal casings and getting ready to emerge as adults, that tree will actually set off a second flush of leaves, uses what energy is still reserved in the roots, puts off a second flush of leaves, but now its growing season is reduced and the amount of food stores in the roots is reduced. So that tree's vigor is reduced a little bit. And if that happens year after year, they become weaker and they become more susceptible to other diseases and pests. And as that energy store in the roots is completely depleted, they don't have the ability to put off a second flush of leaves if they become defoliated again and they die. If you have a tree that is already weak or may have other problems going on, a single year defoliation can be pretty devastating. Evergreen trees do not have the ability, they grow differently than our broadleaves, our deciduous trees. So a single year of any kind of defoliation for a white pine or a spruce tree can be pretty devastating. Fortunately, we've got some natural enemies of spongy moth. There are some predators that will go after the egg mass, the eggs specifically. Some deer mice, squirrels have been known to pick through them. Birds, chickadees, and nuthatches in particular have been noted feeding on the eggs. And again, most predators are going after that egg mass and the eggs, not the caterpillars. Those hairs on the caterpillar that we noted before make them exceptionally unpalatable to most things that might try and eat them. We also have a couple of pathogens that are in spongy moth populations to help control them. And there's a parasitoid that helps control populations. In most places, these sort of things help keep them from reaching outbreak levels, but it doesn't always work. There's not always enough pressure from natural enemies to stop outbreaks and to stop defoliation, but they're helpful. So on the pathogen side, we've got two pathogens. We have nucleopolyhedrosis virus, or NPV for short, and we also have Entomophaga mymega, and that's a fungus that infects spongy moth. So NPV virus occurs naturally in all spongy moth populations. It's species specific, so it's only going to attack spongy moth. It spreads through contact between caterpillars. When you have very high populations, NPV becomes more prevalent because the caterpillars are crunched together and they're a lot closer, and that virus spreads a lot quicker. The entomophaga, I'll note, if you have NPV, if you have spongy moth and you see caterpillars hanging from your tree in this inverted V shape, that's indicative that it was killed by the NPV virus. And the entomophaga, the fungus that kills spongy moth, again, species specific, it will actually, when it dies from the fungus, it'll die and hang from its tail. That's actually its tail up at the top there. And it'll hang head down. And as it ages, it gets pretty desiccated. And that's the fungus is actually living in there and creating more spores. It's the timing and behavior is why spongy moth gets infected with this particular fungus. Native caterpillars, they're either not out or they cannot be infected with it, or their behavior is such that they don't become infected with it. So entomophaga, really specific to spongy moth. NPV can only infect spongy moth. We also have this awesome parasitoid wasp. It is a non-stinging wasp. If you look at that middle picture of the egg masses and see the little bits of pepper kind of sprinkled over it, that's actually the wasp laying its egg inside the spongy moth egg. I'm not going to try and butcher that particular name. If you're interested in learning more about it, it's a parasitoid wasp, host specific to spongy moth, and it does again help manage populations a little bit. So that's a really very brief, very broad overview of this pest that we've been attempting to manage and deal with for a very long time. So for here in Indiana, we're gonna get pretty specific now and talk about Indiana and things we do about it. The first moth was captured in Indiana in 1973, and that would be the first male moth. Again, remember, the female emits the pheromone that attracts the male to her, and we utilize that in our survey. We utilize that in our management. Knowing your pest and its life cycle is really critical to effective management. In 1988, we started our first statewide survey for spongy moth using that female pheromone to track males. In 1999, we joined the federal Slow the Spread program. At the end of 2023 survey season, we have actually captured 739,057 male moths in the state through all of our trapping activities. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me get rid of that. I apologize. My phone started going off and I tried to get rid of it. There we go. So as part of the STS program, we have ground treatments that we utilize. We have aerial treatments that we utilize. We have mating disruption that we can do aerially. We have larvicides that we do aerially. Again, part of that Slow the Spread program. That Slow the Spread program is it's a project, nonprofit organization managed through U.S. Forest Service. Indiana is one of 10 part of this program. It consists of those states along what we call the leading edge of the spongy moth quarantine area. The purpose of the Slow the Spread Foundation is to conduct these activities designed to slow the natural spread of spongy moth to protect those outlying areas from damage caused by the pest. Spongy moth has got about a 13-mile a year natural spread rate. If we do absolutely nothing, it's been shown to move about 13 miles a year on its own through that ballooning activity and things like that. With the Slow the Spread program, we've managed to cut that to 5 miles a year. So it's a very successful program. And again, we're not trying to stop it, we're trying to eradicate it. We're trying to slow that spread and movement. We do that through in terms of intensive survey activities. We have regulatory activities. We do some eradication treatments. We do population suppression treatments in what's known as that action zone, and we'll discuss that a little bit more here in just a few slides. So it all starts with the adult survey. And again, it's a state federal management in those 10 states, work with the federal government to coordinate this massive trapping program, adult survey. You might see these little traps. The trap there on the right is called a delta trap. It's a little triangle, and there's the little female pheromone in there to attract the male. If you're in areas where there is known population or in a quarantine area, you might see those nice, great big, what's called a milk carton trap, and there's the pheromone in there and an insecticide strip in the bottom so that when the spongy moth crawls in, they don't leave again. And we use this to figure out, okay, we have populations of males here, and it's in relation to where within the zones, and is it a growing population? Is it a decreasing population? We go out, if we got a growing population, we do egg mass surveys to try and find where the reproducing populations are. If we find populations that need to be managed to help prevent defoliation, again, when we're doing those management techniques, it is to just reduce the population a little bit to help protect our trees and our forests. We know we're not going to completely eradicate the pest from the country or from the state. It's been here way too long. We're just attempting to manage it, slow it down, protect our resources as much as we can. So this is kind of a confusing little map when you first start looking at it. This is all of this data is all available online. Everything the Slow the Spread program does is very transparent. All the data is available for folks to look at. This map, let's see if we can get my cursor over here again. Hopefully you can see this a little bit. You see on the map all these areas where there's no colors and no lines, like Lansing and Pittsburgh. Those are areas where spongy moth is established. Those are federally quarantined areas. And what we have beyond that, with this really dark red line and the orange line, that's our first tier of monitoring. We monitor these areas. These are quarantined areas. We know spongy moth is there, but by monitoring the populations, we get a feel for ebb and flow. Are populations generally rising? Are they generally flowing? And then we have a second tier of monitoring, like this orange line down to this green line going through Fort Wayne. Again, to monitor those populations as they're moving out of the quarantined areas. We look for hot spots. All these dark reds and things are very high populations. Yellows and greens, light greens and blues are lower populations. But this is all available because of that mass trapping that happens throughout the Slow the Spread program. And what we have between these two green lines, if you can see just south of Fort Wayne to just south of Muncie, that's what we call the action zone in the Slow the Spread program. And that is where the vast majority of treatments take place. And that's just, again, slow that natural spread so that this pest marches through a little slower so that we can keep things like NPV and entomophaga in populations so that things like deer mice and chickadees can learn that those egg masses are something that might be a food source. If we have populations, let's say down further south, like we have one right now in Richmond, a little higher population that we're actually doing an actual eradication treatment on. We did our first treatment in 2019, and we're still seeing some residual populations. So this year we're going to go over and do some mating disruption to hopefully knock that entire population out. If you're familiar with Indiana, that becomes into the White River Valley area, very forested area. If spongy moth were to take hold there and become established, that could be pretty devastating, and it would be a huge jump in where populations are known to occur. So I know that again, that was kind of a little confusing. Those are the general terms we use with the Slow the Spread program, and this is what we did in Indiana last year. So all of those traps and all of that data leads to things like this. And we'll first look at that map on the right, where each little dot is a single trap. And then we count how many moths we actually caught in each trap. And again, that helps us know exactly where it is, helps us monitor growing populations or decreasing populations. Before we can treat something, we have to know where it is. And those trap catches lead to our ground surveys. And then we also create this nice little map here on the left, where you can see that's total moths caught per county. Whether we have 5 traps or 30 traps, that's the total number of moths. And you can see down south, we have a few blow-ins here and there. Mostly, we have no catch in those areas. And if you look at the map, I want to point out as we get further north, obviously our colors get a little darker. That's because we know it's established. Those are quarantined areas, and they're marked here on this map by those little hash marks. Like Allen County has got those little hash marks over it. DeKalb, Whitney, Kosciuszko. Those are Indiana quarantine counties. Spongy moth established there. We know it's established there. DNR, we're not going to be able to do treatments there, except for in very rare occasions. That is no longer a part of the Slow the Spread program, where we target treatments, where we're able to get federal funds and assistance with treatments. So in those quarantined areas and behind those lines, that's up to homeowner management, that's up to county management, or whatever organization may be able to come together to manage higher populations. DNR, we have treated a couple of locations in that quarantined area. We have treated DNR owned properties. And that's because as Department of Natural Resources, it is our obligation and duty to protect those properties that are owned by the state. Chain of Lakes comes to mind. A few years ago, we did a treatment over the campground area in Chain of Lakes, DNR-owned property, to help reduce some of the pressure of the population that was there, to help save those trees from defoliation and to protect that state-owned resource. So as part of the Slow the Spread program, aerial treatments are something that is done. There are 2 basic kinds of aerial treatments: mating disruption, which is coming up here in June, and a larvicide, which typically takes place in May. Those have to be very targeted. We use very specific products that are specific to Lepidoptera and specific to spongy moth, because it's the only thing that's out really feeding at that time. It does not persist in the environment. It's only stays in the environment for 4 to 10 days. And it really only impacts very young, small larvae. So that treatment is very targeted. If you think about the maps we just looked over a little bit, right? We're working within that zone when we do these treatments for Slow the Spread. anything south of that line, so anything south of Muncie, south of Kokomo in Indiana, those would be considered eradication areas if we had a large population and a reproducing population show up. And again, anything kind of north of those, it's established and management's basically done by the homeowner. This is where I want to do kind of a plug for our website. If you're in Indiana, you're concerned about spongy moth, or you're concerned about what the state is or is not doing, everything. We are an exceedingly transparent program. We're not trying to hide anything from anyone. We are here to serve the people of Indiana. So if you go to on.in.gov/spongy moth, that'll take you directly to this page. You can do an internet search, Indiana spongy moth, Indiana DNR spongy moth. We put everything up on our website, and I would encourage anyone in the state of Indiana in January every year, pop onto the website, see what's going on. When are our meetings? What are we proposing to do? What kind of questions might you have? So in this year, we've already done our 2 BTK treatments, and then they're listed here. The product used, the product label, so that folks can read the actual label of the product. We obviously, label is the law. We're very adamant about following those product labels. You want to know more about what we're doing for mating disruption. Again, here's the areas we have listed. You want to see what the product is. It's actually an organic food grade substance. It's a wax, basically, that has the female pheromone put into it, so that when we spread that and then it degrades, it's a food grade substance. But again, people got questions. We should absolutely ask questions about what's being done, how it's being done. All of that information is there. And actually, if you go to this webpage and you're really curious, and I really do encourage folks to do this, we have this interactive web map where you can find out exactly where, and early on, we call it proposed, because we do look and we encourage folks to give us feedback about what's going on, about their concerns. Let us answer your questions, please. But if so, in January, this map will be renewed in January-ish every year. We renew it, and you can type your address in, and it will take you to your address, and you can say, am I close? Am I not? When we go to do any kind of treatment, when we begin to propose these treatments, we send out notification to every address within a half mile of any of these proposed areas, so that folks have the opportunity to join us in our meetings. We post it on social media. We have newspaper releases. We have a legal obligation to actually have those notices posted in the legal section of newspapers. We are trying to get folks in these areas. We want you to be involved. We want to know your concerns. We want you to know what's going on. So let's say, that's a nice little plug for our website. Anybody in Indiana, really encourage you to check ours out. And I will say every state in the Slow the Spread program has exactly the same form. They don't have the same format. They have the same information on their web pages. If you're in Ohio or Illinois and you want to know what your state is doing, do that web search, find that information, and definitely educate yourself on it. So probably for folks in northern Indiana, maybe hopefully this will be a nice informative part of the talk. So I got it. What should I do about it? And if you're in one of those colored counties in Indiana, you've got it to some degree or another. We know it's established. We know you've got it. You may have defoliation, you may not, but if you notice it, what can you do about it? So like I mentioned before, burlap banding is a phenomenal way to protect and manage populations on a tree and to protect a single tree. It's used for the caterpillar stage, which we're right in the middle of. We can still be using this method to help protect trees. If you're noticing a lot of caterpillars on your tree, you're noticing some munching and some defoliation, You can get some burlap bands from just about any garden center, home improvement store. You take a little piece of twine, you wrap that burlap band all the way around, has to be all the way around the trunk of the tree. You take a little twine, you tie it, and then you're basically waiting. You put it on, leave it for at least a day, maybe two. So what spongy moth does is they feed at night. Caterpillars crawl up that tree, they feed at night, and then as the sun comes up, they start to crawl back down to look for protected areas, look for cool areas to protect themselves from the sun. They look to protect themselves from potential predators. So they look for nice little hiding places. And when you have this burlap band around, you can actually catch some spongy moth, as you can see in that top right-hand picture, some spongy moth. You can make sure that it is spongy moth, that it's something that needs to be managed. And if it's not spongy moth, if it's something that's just kind of hanging out to protect itself, you can let it go and leave it be. But if you've got some spongy moth caterpillars underneath that burlap, you can take a little utensil or a gloved hand and brush it off into some soapy water. And I say a utensil or a gloved hand because remember that picture of all those hairs on that caterpillar, that can cause some dermatitis issues for some folks. So we always recommend not handling the caterpillars. You just brush them off into some soapy water. Soapy water is about 3 tablespoons of dish soap to a pint of water. Put the caterpillars in that soapy water. You leave them for about 48 hours, and then you can dispose of them. The caterpillars are dead, and you protected that single tree. There are, if you're curious about exactly how to do it, DNR, we have helped folks burlap band. We've done some burlap banding for folks to try and help them manage localized populations. We're happy to give you that information. There's some great YouTube videos if you want to kind of see it in action. The city of Markham in Canada actually has a great one, about 2 or 3 minutes to show you everything you need to do. So this one is I got it. What I should I not do? This is generally not recommended here in Indiana. I'm gonna show it because if you do your own internet research, you might come across these things. And it's basically a sticky trap, which means you put some banding around the tree, and then you put something like tanglefoot, which is an exceedingly sticky substance on the outside edge. And the reason it's generally not recommended is because that sticky substance will catch anything and everything that crawls through it, not just spongy moth caterpillars. So it's a little more indiscriminate about what it's going to catch and what it's going to ultimately kill. There may be situations where it is warranted, but as a general rule, for most homeowners, that burlap banding is really your better way to go. Again, I only mention it because if you do some internet search, you might come across it. So, if you're noticing a lot of caterpillars, you know you're in a quarantined area, you might see those egg masses. And again, if you find egg masses and you're not positive it's spongy moth, make sure you get a positive identification before you start doing egg mass destruction. But egg mass destruction is another great way for homeowners to kind of protect their individual resources. You can scrape those egg masses into a container of soapy water again. Usually use some kind of putty knife or something similar because we don't want to damage the bark of the tree. We want to just get that egg mass into that little bit of soapy water. Do it on a calm day. The egg masses, the eggs, individual eggs, are actually pretty light. If you're on a really breezy day and you think you're scraping those eggs into some soapy water, the egg can actually be caught by the wind and fly off, and it can still hatch. So you want to do it on a calm day. You can treat egg masses that you can easily see and reach with a horticultural oil labeled for spongy moth. Again, Lymantria dispar. It's available in most home and lawn garden centers. Don't use anything other than a product properly labeled for spongy moth egg masses. And that kind of goes for anything and everything. I know on social media, there's all kinds of posts about, hey, don't spend money on this chemical or that chemical. You can do it yourself. Um, in most all those kind of cases, you're actually doing a lot more harm than good. Always use a product that is labeled for the use in which you're going to use it for what it's intended for. Using homemade remedies can often and most often do cause a lot more harm than good. We want to know, again, what we've got. We want to properly manage it. We want to read that label. We want to know that that label is effective for the pest we have to manage, and we want to follow the directions on that label. If you're vacuuming, I have vacuuming here because they actually make special little backpack vacuums now that can suck up insects and the like. So that might be an option, especially if you hire a professional tree care company to come help. If you've got a really bad problem, you've got, I mean, an investment and resource that is very valuable. We want to protect it. We may need to hire someone to help us protect it, and the cost benefit analysis may be that it's very well worthwhile to hire that professional to come out and to work with you to help you meet your management goals. We always say hire a certified arborist. That certification means they've got an education to get that certification. There's also the requirement to continually educate themselves to get those education credits every year so that they know the latest products, they know the latest techniques, they know how to use their equipment properly. And it may be that you want to have a couple of prize trees that need to be protected, and you can hire a professional who has the equipment and ability to protect them. Treatment costs vary widely and greatly depending upon where you are, who you hire, what technique you're going to use. Burlap banding, again, is a really fairly inexpensive, easy way for homeowners to at least take that first step. There are a few groups who have actually gotten together and organized. And if you're in an area where you've got a lot of pressure, organizing and working with your neighbors as a group, as a community, is going to be a much more effective way to manage populations. If I've got a bad spongy moth problem and I protect my trees the best I can, I either put some burlap banding out or I do a little chemical treatment. My neighbor does absolutely nothing. There's still that high population there that's going to continually be put onto my property, right? Insects, pests, they don't know property bounds. They don't know political boundaries. So if we can organize as a group together, it's going to be much more effective. We've actually got at least one that I know of, and maybe another one where communities kind of come together. Group of neighbors, large group of neighbors, they all agree they've got a problem. They all agree they want it treated, and they've actually hired an aerial applicator to treat all of their areas so that that cost is kind of spread out among a lot of different homeowners. And as DNR, we helped provide some technical expertise for them, so they knew what kind of products, what kind of applicators you might need to hire, uh, when's the best time to treat, how to work with these things. And we, of course, because of our trapping, we manage populations, and that's information that can be helpful to a homeowner as well. Again, that's exceedingly rare that homeowners will do that private aerial application, but it does happen. And as we near the end here, I want to put out a great big plug for our Purdue entomology extension folks. They have a fantastic website. If you're sitting here going, I didn't really catch all of that, or maybe that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, Purdue extension has this wonderful website where they give you some management techniques and things look for and think about as you're managing this defoliator pest. Is your tree likely to cover? Is it not? Your extension agent in whatever state you're in is a phenomenal resource, and we are very fortunate here in Indiana to have some awesome folks with Purdue use your extension, your local county extension agents. They're a phenomenal resource for you. So uh, that is a kind of down and dirty overview of Spongy Moth and Spongy Moth here in Indiana. I want to thank everybody who did attend. Again, my name's Christy Stoltz. This is my email address. If you want to contact the Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology directly, that's our general group email. We get a lot of folks saying, hey, what's this? Into that. That's also a reporting tool. If you think you've got a problem, you can use that email. Again, you can always reach out to me personally as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can for anybody. So thanks again, folks. And with that, I will attempt to stop sharing and we'll end the slideshow.
All right, thank you, Chrissy, for sharing all of that.